We are hanging out. We're not in the same city. We're not in the same spot, but it will not prevent us from breaking down everything you need to know about NFL free agency. It's the free agent draft grade live stream. That's a lot for me to say, so I'm only going to try it once. Bill Barnwell, Golic Jr., I'm Jason Fitz, and we're going to get you caught up on everything you need to know, guys. We're going to spend a little time now getting the breakdowns. I'll let you guys be the smart guys. Before we get to any of the stuff that we've already got planned, the breaking news we have just now as we come to you is that we have Dante Fowler Jr. headed to the Atlanta Falcons on a 3-year deal. Bill Barnwell, what's your reaction to that?
Makes logical sense, right? This is a team that we've known for years. They need to do something to fix this pass rush and fix this defense. They waited so long for Vic Beasley to turn into a useful defensive lineman. It just didn't happen for any stretch of time. So Fowler, still young, still a guy who's on the upswing. I kind of throw his Jacksonville tenure out when it comes to just, that was a mess of an organization, wrong fit for the wrong guy. So still pretty young, still a lot of upside, and a guy who had, I believe, 11 sacks last year for the Rams. So a logical move for the Falcons. If they're going to spend a lot of money, the pass rusher makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's been some place, or we've seen them. You mentioned Vic Beasley, Tech McKinley, you can throw on top there in the same vein. Like they've been searching for, and especially, and we know this Dan Quinn defense that is supposed to thrive in the way we were used to seeing Seattle defenses thrive, using smaller bodies like this, swarming around the football that's just never quite come to fruition. So maybe getting one guy that can burst through the wall like that finally starts to get some sort of traction there.
Some of the reports, guys, were that the Rams were all in on trying to keep Dante Fowler Jr., and he selected the Falcons instead. Junior, any surprise with that decision?
A little bit. I mean, I don't know. You look at the Rams and the path that they're going to have, certainly division-wise, I don't think either is going to be a walk in the park at this point, especially the way that we've seen the South retool in the last few days here. But maybe a sign of things to come. Certainly the Rams have an uphill battle when it comes to their offseason. They're strapped as far as picks. They've got a lot of money tied up in guys that they've given a lot of draft capital away for. But a little surprise there just because of how bad the Falcons defense was.
Bill, any thoughts on the Rams and why you'd want to walk away from them?
That team is a mess right now. They're in transition. They've replaced both their coordinators. They don't have the draft picks like Gojo said. I mean, this is a team now where we don't know where they're going to add talent. They're just shedding players on both sides of the line of scrimmage. So kind of feels like a sinking ship in some ways, which is crazy for a team that was in the Super Bowl just a year ago. But that team kind of feels like a mess right now.
Well, Bill mentioned 11.5 sacks last year, second most on the Rams. He now goes to the Falcons, where suddenly, by going to the Falcons, he's going to be chasing down a new quarterback in the division. We managed to make it this far in without asking the questions, but we know the big signing right now is Brady to the Bucs. I'll start with you, Bill. What's your reaction to Brady to the Bucs?
How can you say no, right? This is an instant A for me. And just in terms of, it's a shot you have to take. Your only quarterback on the roster right now is Ryan Griffin. You've had Jameis Winston for the last several seasons as your starting quarterback, and the greatest quarterback of all time is just sitting there. You don't have to trade picks for him. You don't have to give him a piece of the franchise. You just have to pay what? It seems like $30 million a year is kind of the rumor for his average annual salary. That's a thing you do 10 times out of 10, even if it fails, even if he looks old next year, which is not out of the question. It's still a risk you have to take. There's no one in this market who is flawless, who is an easy plug and play for Bruce Arians' scheme. I think Tom Brady is the pick in the trade you have to make if you're the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Absolutely. And I think what goes along with that is kind of what we've talked about. Wherever Tom Brady's potential location was going to be, the added advantage always was you knew this was for a limited window coming up and you were going to get a jump start on your future. There wasn't going to be the mess of having to decide, were we going to tag Jameis Winston or potentially have to invest in the future there? This one is relatively clean, the way Bill said, and the way you can set this up for your future as an organization now.
Different questions along the way, not just for the Bucs and the Patriots, but the rest of the league. So I want to start with one of the other sort of concepts you just mentioned, Junior, as you looked at Jameis Winston. Like, what's next for Jameis Winston if he's not the quarterback for Tampa Bay?
It's a good question, right? Like the musical chairs of quarterbacks this offseason seems like it's going to leave more than a few guys standing there uncomfortably right now. We're not sure what's going to happen with the Chargers, but could they be comfortable going into the season with the quarterback situation they have right now with Tyrod Taylor? It really seems to be, after Chicago made the move that we'll talk about today, Are the Patriots going to bring Jameis Winston in? Is Bill Belichick really that full of pride in himself that he thinks he can trim the fat off that one? I'm not sure, but Jameis Winston might be looking at a backup job somewhere at this point.
Well, and Bill, if you're suddenly looking at, if you're one of the other teams that we've been active, I know we got a lot of quarterbacks to talk about, but you mentioned $30 million. I mean, if you're looking at it, for example, the Colts, we'll get to them, they're willing to spend money on Phillip Rivers. Should more teams have been aggressive in trying to acquire Tom Brady?
I was surprised there wasn't more of an interest around the league where a team like the Bears, for example, that did trade for Nick Foles, if you're going to give Nick Foles maybe $20 million a year, we're still waiting to hear what the terms are on his restructure, wouldn't you go those extra $10 million and go to Tom Brady and say, hey, we're going to move on from Mitch Trubisky. He's not the guy, but we have, again, possibly the greatest quarterback in football history. As much as Nick Foles was able to outduel Tom Brady in the Super Bowl, I'd rather have Tom Brady at $30 million a year than Nick Foles at $20 million a year. Plus, they had to give up a draft pick to make that deal happen. So,
and Bill, I think that's really interesting. And Mike, I want your thoughts on it because Ryan Pace, the GM for the Bears, is going to be forever identified as the person that turned around and signed. I mean, he drafted Mitchell Trubisky at the second overall pick, did draft Mahomes, didn't draft Deshaun Watson. What's the one way you stop that conversation? In my mind, you acquire Tom Brady, no matter what it takes, because then you can go to your fans and say, sorry, we screwed up the draft, but hey, we got Brady, right? Like, why not do that?
Yeah, this seems like a move with Foles and we talked about this with every prospect, whether it was Teddy Bridgewater, who was reportedly someone the Bears that were flirting with in this. The Andy Dalton names came up, Cam Newton, who reportedly now maybe they weren't as serious about. But with all those, it was either brought up as, are you the clear starter or are you competition for Mitchell Trubisky? And a move like Nick Foles, while I think he slots as the starter initially in all this, doesn't really close the door fully on Mitch Trubisky in a way that maybe the Bears aren't comfortable with yet, because when you bring Tom Brady or one of the quarterbacks we're talking about there, you slam that door shut, you deadbolt it several times, and then you nail a board over the top of it.
I find it to be interesting when you talk about where sort of they're going with the Bears, because Nick Foles needed particular offensive schemes put into place to be as successful as he was. So, Bill, how can they implement those schemes in Chicago in a way that doesn't also lessen the ability of Mitchell Trubisky if they're still trying to give him an opportunity to win the job?
I mean, the best stuff Nick Foles did over the course of his time, not only in college at Arizona, but then also with the Eagles, was work off of those RPOs. You limit the field. You give him one side of the field to work with or a quick read to work with, where he gets the ball out quickly. He doesn't have to think. That plays to Mitchell Trubisky's strengths and weaknesses as well. You don't want Trubisky scanning both sides of the field, working through the pocket, trying to get to that fourth progression, because he's never going to get there anyway. So I think limiting the playbook, sort of building an offense that plays to Foles' strengths, will actually also play in a strange way to Trubisky's strengths.
Bill, I'm interested too. How much are you buying into? Because a lot of people are going to point at the coaching staff with Foles here. He certainly had overlapped with Matt Nagy when he was an offensive quality control coach in Philadelphia during his first stint there, back in the Chip Kelly days. You have DeFilippo, who was the offensive coordinator with him in Jacksonville and also overlapped with him before. How much stock are you putting in the idea, the value of that, given what might be a truncated offseason this year?
I mean, we've seen Nick Foles. His best work has come with Andy Reid or people who have worked under Andy Reid. So getting him back with those people, I know DeFilippo was there, but obviously there were people in Jacksonville who were not necessarily part of that scheme. And we know from the Tom Coughlin side of things, they wanted to be a run-first offense. So I think absolutely at the end of the day, it's going to be better for him to be in that scheme. And like you said, with a possible truncated offseason, you can really install stuff with Foles from afar. I mean, he's going to know the playbook pretty much from day one. So I think having that ability just goes such a long way in terms of having Foles ready if you want him ready for week one of the NFL season.
I feel like I've failed everybody at this point. The name of the show is the Free Agency Draft Grade live stream. And so far, we've not mentioned two quarterbacks and given no grades along the way. So
Bill stuck an A in there for Tom Brady. He stuck the A in there.
He got in there. So we'll get to the next quarterback. But quickly, Junior, what's your grade on Brady to the Bucs?
I'm with Bill. This one makes perfect sense right there. And really, for both sides, the amount of weapons you're now getting for Tom Brady as an aging quarterback, and Bill did a great job. If you haven't read his article yet on ESPN.com, go and do it, looking at some of the issues that Tom Brady had last year and how having the weapons he's now going to have at his disposal might mitigate some of that, even for a guy who's now in uncharted territory age-wise.
Well, you get an A for getting the plug in there also. So we've got 2 A's for that one. Quickly, where do we have give me a grade, Bill, on Foles to the Bears?
Still up in the air. I don't know what the contract situation is yet. I mean, in terms of the on-field fit, I would say a C+. I think a solid fit. Like to assume they've done something else, but we don't know how much of the money the Bears are absorbing.
All right, Mike, you're great on Foles.
I'd go B- just because I was so hyper-focused this offseason on the Bears bringing some sort of change there. That team around, especially on defense, has too much going for it to continue to trot out the same thing at quarterback. You brought in someone that I think is absolutely going to come in right away as the starter over Mitch Trubisky. So for that alone, I'm putting you in the B range.
All right, so let's get to the next quarterback as we grade some of these. The next one, Phillip Rivers headed to the Colts. Before I go off on this, I want to get smarter thoughts. So, Junior, what do you got on Phillip Rivers to the Colts?
Phillip Rivers to the Colts was like the thing that we all said at the beginning of this offseason, right? It made such an overwhelming amount of sense. And for me, I almost wanted it just because for Phillip Rivers, who has been, as I said, the NFL's version of Sisyphus, pushing a boulder up an icy hill for all of eternity with a minute left in the fourth quarter, the length of the field to go, and maybe one timeout down 6. He's done all this with what's been basically a glorified turnstile in front of him, a rotation of replacement level offensive linemen for what seems like the last 8 years. So now he gets the best offensive line in football. I feel like if nothing else, yeah, Phillip Rivers might have probably deteriorated faster than Tom Brady has over the course of time here, but this is going to be the best chance for what he's always lacked. And for that, I'm pretty happy with this one.
Bill, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have it as a B+. I think it's a good deal. 1 year, $25 million. I think the money is right. The length is right for the Colts. And to Mike's point, I mean, I think that offensive line is going to go such a long way. Phillip Rivers last year, those interceptions were a problem, but he led the league in interceptions thrown in the final 5 minutes when his team was trailing. He was throwing a lot of picks when his team was desperate to try and catch up, and he was forcing balls into windows. He doesn't typically need to force the football. The year before, when their offense was playing well, the line was playing well, and they were winning a bunch of games, 1 pick in those same situations. So I really think it's going to be about, can the Colts get him in positive situations where he doesn't have to get desperate? If they can, I think they're going to have a pretty good quarterback and a guy who I think is just going to put them in good situations before the snap with his ability to read defenses, and then after the snap with where he puts the football when he doesn't have to make a desperate throw.
To Bill's
Mike,
point
to
Bill's point there, Jameis Winston or Phillip Rivers was tied with Jameis Winston 10 interceptions into tight window throws over the course of last season. So certainly the biggest area for improvement, and certainly stands to see some of that.
Did you give it a letter grade, Mike? Because that's what we're doing here. We're grading these things. Did you give it a grade?
Listen, Bill's the guy that does the professional grades and all this. I'm the talk radio gas bag. If you want a grade from me, I'll co-sign Bill's B+ on this one. How about that? I'll lump easy onto the back of the smart guy.
Look, I'm the host here, just facilitating you guys, but I'm giving it an F, and I mean a strong F. And listen, I've watched a lot of Phillip Rivers last year, and I understand where you're coming from, Bill. But also, I mean, I'll go back to the Raiders game as a Raiders fan, wearing my sweatshirt. I'll go back to the Raiders game last year. Phillip Rivers gave the Raiders that game in a game where they did not play well. He is a gunslinger where can't get the ball where it needs to go anymore. And we're sitting here saying that the Chargers were a good option for Brady because they had these weapons around. Same weapons he just couldn't maximize. He takes forever to make bad decisions with the football. I think Chris Ballard took a roster that was frankly a quarterback and nobody else, and built it beautifully to be everybody else and needs a quarterback. I don't understand $25 million to a guy whose best years are behind him that's only being lumped into Brady and Breeze because he happens to also be old. I'm just saying, I'm out on this one. I'm 1,000% out on this one.
So we got 2 B+ and an F.
Yeah, fair.
And an F from the guy wearing the Raiders hoodie. Look, I want that on public record.
Let me say this. If the Chargers had Phillip Rivers still as their quarterback next year, I'd be doing cartwheels. That's how much I don't respect Phillip Rivers games anymore. Okay, let's go. Nobody's asking me at this point. We'll go on to the Titans. The Titans make a big deal. The Texans make a massive trade yesterday that sort of blew everybody's mind as DeAndre Hopkins is headed from the Texans over to the Cardinals. David Johnson is headed over to the Texans. So got a couple of moving pieces here, some draft picks also. But Bill, we'll do this first from the Texans standpoint. So from the Texans standpoint, how do you view the trade of DeAndre Hopkins?
I mean, what I wrote was, I'm worried DeAndre Hopkins is missing a limb. That was my first thought, is that maybe he has one leg or one arm. Even then, I think it's still probably a pretty good trade for the Cardinals with a one-legged or one-armed DeAndre Hopkins. But if he has all 4 of his limbs, it's inexplicable. I mean, we all are on the internet. We're all, on social media. We all see, the contrarian opinions, the hot takes. There is nobody. I haven't seen a single person who has justified or made sense of the Texan side of this trade. I mean, there's just literally zero people who have defended the Texans on this deal. So whether he wanted more money, whether he wanted to hold out, great. You can't hold out under the new CBA if you're a veteran. The money he was asking for, if it's $18 to $20 million a year, that's pretty reasonable money for a superstar wide receiver. That's not the end of the world. So I just think the Texans decided they wanted to get rid of DeAndre Hopkins, and they took whatever the first reasonable offer to them was, and that offer is abysmal.
Yeah, this has been kind of the modus operandum there for a while. In a GM-less world, the way that you've mismanaged what's gone on with Larry Tunsil, the way that you let Jadeveon Clowney walk, giving away first-round picks and acquiring none in return for the most valuable non-Deshaun Watson asset on your team is so laughably bad. And listen, we all heard Michael Irvin also go on Get Up this morning and the things that he's talking about, and whether or not DeAndre Hopkins came out and kind of tried to put out those fires. And whether or not interpersonally it's that bad, we know there seemed to be enough friction behind closed doors here that part of this, to explain the unexplainable, had to be personal.
Bill, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, even if it is, though, even if that's the case and it's just you have a terrible relationship, that's fine. No big deal. But you can still get more than what they got for DeAndre Hopkins, because every other team is not going to feel like they're going to have the same friction and the same problem. So for me, I think I gave the Cardinals a B+ just because they have so much invested at wide receiver. Not a bad thing, just they have other holes on their roster, but it's a straight up F for the Texans. I think I hate this trade for the Texans more than Fitz hates Phillip Rivers in general. So that's as much as I hate this
Wow, Mike, what's I know. What's your grade, Mike?
Oh, I mean, it's an F. It's, did you ever see like in Christmas Story when she goes up on the board and writes A+++ for Ralphie's paper? This is an F minus. Like, you just keep going into eternity for this, for all the reasons that Bill and I just said. It's in the non-Herschel Walker division, this has got to be one of the worst trades in NFL history.
This trade makes me wonder what, who does Bill Barnwell have pictures of the GM to be able to keep his job through this bad of a trade? For the Cardinals, Junior, you like this move?
I do. I mean, listen, when you look at, and I think this is the one thing that I've been critical of Steve Keim and others for moves in the past there. But the one thing I look now and say, all right, you were going to bring in Kliff Kingsbury and you already let him go back-to-back 1 year, 1 overall picks to bring Kyler Murray in, a quarterback that fit what he wanted to do. And now you said, all right, we'll go all in on an offense. Now, granted, this kind of fell into your lap in a way I don't think anyone could have predicted, but this now goes all in on an offense that we know wants to push the ball deep down the field, wants to do some of the things that we saw for years at Texas Tech with Kliff Kingsbury as the coach there. I'm with Bill. They've got a ton of other needs, including up front in the offensive line. Thankfully, this is, especially at the top end, one of the better tackle drafts in recent memory. So you're going to have some chances to improve your team there. But this fits, I think, right into the mold of what they've been trying to build there. And so coherence always is rewarded with good grades here.
All right. So part of the reason this trade feels terrible is the value comparison. Stefon Diggs gets moved later for an absolute bounty. So you got one wide receiver being moved for a bag of hot Cheetos and another one being moved for a bounty. So let's take a look at Stefon Diggs going away from the Vikings to the Bills. We'll start from the Vikings standpoint. Bill, what's your reaction there?
I don't like trading Stefon Diggs, but I think if they're going to do it, and it seems like they have wanted to for a while now, both sides have kind of wanted a fresh start. I think this was a good time to do it and a pretty reasonable haul. Getting a first-round pick, a couple extra picks, obviously much more than the Hopkins deal. And this is, of course, a great draft for wide receivers, a very deep draft for wide receivers. Vikings now 2 first-rounders, second rounder, 2 third-round picks. So they have 5 picks now in the first 3 rounds. They can go out and get a wide receiver who's, again, not going to replace Stefon Diggs, but at least give you some depth and give them depth elsewhere on that roster. They're a really top-heavy team right now, so adding some players behind those stars, I think, is a positive thing for them. So I don't love Stefon Diggs. I don't love the trade of Stefon Diggs, but I think if you're going to make the trade, now is the right time to do it. This is a pretty reasonable return.
Yeah, and we mentioned all of the issues that we thought might have been going on in Houston. Listen, Stefon Diggs had made it publicly clear hours before in the day after they re-signed Kirk Cousins. He's been a bit of a problem child there for a while, But because this is a franchise with coherent people running it, you're still able to get things in return for a guy that everyone knows wanted to be out of there. They got some cap relief too, which we know as we saw them kind of shuffling around bodies. They let Xavier Rhodes and Linval Joseph gone out of there so they could re-sign Kirk Cousins. Having that flexibility in a wide receiver which draft seems to be the win Minnesota was looking for.
Okay, so quick thoughts from the other side of it, because Josh Allen's the quarterback for the Bills. So Stefon Diggs hasn't been quiet. He's not going to be quiet if Allen doesn't play well with him. So Barnwell, how do you like this move from the Bills standpoint?
I think it's a logical fit. I mean, obviously they're so built on culture that adding someone who, seems to have some issues when it comes to not getting the ball might impact that culture. But I think it's just you have to take a risk on some talent sometimes. It's the reality of the NFL is that you're not going to have 53 choir boys. So I think if you're going to take a risk, this was the right time to take a risk on a player who, when he's healthy and productive, is one of the best wide receivers in football.
I think this is a similar format to what we're seeing right now going on with the Cleveland Browns. And Mitchell Trubisky and what the Bears are doing should be the cautionary tale for everyone. It's never too early to say goodbye if you see things clearly aren't going wrong. And so you're looking at this Bill roster, you say, all right, Dawson Knox, this trio of wide receivers that we like there in a defense. The guy that we have to answer questions about still is the quarterback who improved last year. But now in year 3, when we give you everything, can you take the steps necessary? Much like we're going to ask of Baker Mayfield in Cleveland, this is a great litmus test for the most important position on the field for you.
Mike, I like the way you said that. I constantly say it. When you have a rookie quarterback on their rookie deal and you're trying to see how good they are, you have an obligation to draft as many or to acquire as many playmakers as possible to give them every opportunity to prove themselves one way or the other. So that gives us a round look at everything that's happened so far, a lot of what's happened so far. Bill, is there any move that stands out to you so far that you're surprised you haven't seen?
Surprised I haven't seen more movement when it comes to the wide receivers. I mean, Robbie Anderson, I figured was going to be a guy who was going to be very quick off the market. Really haven't seen much out of Anderson or anybody else. The one move was Randall Cobb to the Texans, and I don't think we can assume the Texans are acting rationally. I'm worried that Bill O'Brien might be just throwing darts at a dartboard. That's not out of the question here. So outside of that, wide receiver market's been very, very quiet so far.
Mike?
Really interested to see what happens with Jadeveon Clowney, right? We talked a lot about what some of the highlights of this class coming up, and he was certainly near the top when it came to edge rushers and impact players there. We know Seattle is content to sit on their hands at the start of free agency like they always do, so probably not going to be actively involved around there. But where does Jadeveon Clowney end up? As we talked about Fowler today, a guy who doesn't have the sack totals that a lot of these other edge rushers do, but we know has made an impact in the run game and some other areas that certainly make him. I mean, he's a freakish talent. Like, the guy's so hard to really grade because every once in a while he does the thing that he did in that Michigan game against South Carolina where we all go, oh God, this space alien just happens to have a football helmet on today.
I mean, with that being said, Bill, we expected that Jadeveon would actually set the market. He's not signed yet. What does that say about the market for his skills?
I think it says we're seeing teams look at those numbers and say, hey, even though he is that guy and has that freakish talent, and we could see him take over plays and take over games. Look at that Niners game, the overtime game in the regular season where he was the best player on the field by a comfortable margin. There's injury concerns with him, microfracture knee surgery in his past. Core muscle issue last year that hurt him late in the season. And just the numbers aren't really there. A guy who had, I think, 3.5 sacks last year. So at that price range, when you get to $20+ million a year, I think teams want to see a healthy player and a productive player. And Jadeveon Clowney, for all his upside, it's not necessarily been that guy in years past.
The longer this goes on, what's your likely thought on how this ends up for him?
He's going to have a market at some point, whether it's 16, 18, $19 million a year. I think he's going to get more than Dante Fowler, but maybe not much more than we were expecting.
Well, I'm really shocked. We've gone through this whole show and haven't devoted any time to my beloved Raiders. I don't know how that possibly happened through all of it. Any big loser that stands out to you so far? We always talk about the winners. We know that the Bucs and Brady are the big winners, but any big loser that stands out to you guys so far?
The Texans, right? I mean, every move they've made, I've raised my hands up in a question mark. Bradley Roby's good, but just an absolute disaster for Bill O'Brien.
No losers for me, but I'm very excited about what the Dolphins have done. They've laid it out clearly here. Go get Tua, complete the prophecy, and let's start to see if they can build what they've been tanking for so long now.
You're willing to bet an uncomfortable. I always say you're willing to bet your dad's house that the Dolphins are suddenly a division winner this year, Mike.
Let's Come on, no Brady.
All right, Mike Golic Jr., Bill Barnwell. I'm Jason Fitz. Thanks for hanging out with us. we're giving you your grades. Sort of. I think we graded everything, but none of us were all that great in school. At least Mike and I weren't. So we'll see if we actually graded everything effectively. Gentlemen, thanks for the time. It's been fun hanging out.
My pleasure.